The Strait of Hormuz is the world's energy superhighway, a narrow ribbon of water with an outsized impact on the fate of nations. Stretching just 21 miles at its narrowest point, this strategic passage connects the Persian Gulf to the open waters of the Arabian Sea, and beyond. For centuries, it has been a crossroads of commerce, culture, and conflict. But today, its importance is greater than ever. Every single day, massive oil tankers and LNG carriers thread their way through this tight channel between Iran and Oman. In fact, 1/5 of all global oil exports and 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas must pass through these waters. That's millions of barrels of oil and billions of dollars in energy resources, all funneled through a space so narrow that a single incident could bring the world's energy trade to a standstill. Each day, an astonishing 20 million barrels of oil, worth over $600 billion a year, move through this choke point, making it absolutely essential to the global economy. But it's not just oil that makes this waterway so vital. The Strait of Hormuz is also a lifeline for other critical goods. 1/3 of the world's fertilizer shipments, crucial for global agriculture and food production, also travel through here. Without these supplies, harvests would shrink and food prices would soar, affecting millions of families worldwide. And it's not just oil and fertilizer. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is another lifeblood of modern economies. A huge share of global LNG exports depend on the safe passage through these waters, fueling power plants and heating homes from Asia to Europe. At its narrowest, the shipping lane is only a few miles wide, so tight that ships must follow carefully coordinated routes to avoid collisions. This makes the strait both easy to disrupt and extremely difficult to defend, especially in times of tension. Iran controls the entire northern coastline, giving it enormous leverage over this vital artery. For decades, the strait has been a flashpoint, where rivalries, military maneuvers, and diplomatic standoffs without Motram on den. Sonskan ditan den. So one. Any disruption here, whether from conflict, accident, or political crisis, sends shockwaves through global markets. Oil prices spike, gas stations feel the pinch, and even the cost of groceries can rise as shipping costs soar. The ripple effects touch every corner of the globe, from Wall Street to small-town markets. Today, April 12th, 2026, a new blockade threatens to halt this vital artery. Naval vessels and blockades have brought the flow of oil and gas to a near standstill, raising fears of shortages and economic turmoil. The free flow of commerce is at risk, and the world is watching anxiously. From energy traders to everyday families, everyone is bracing for what comes next. Decisions made in Washington and Tehran now carry global consequences. The choices of a few leaders could determine the fate of billions, as the world's most important waterway hangs in the balance. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a trade route, it's the epicenter of a crisis that could reshape the global order. Military commanders, diplomats, and world leaders are scrambling to find solutions, knowing that the stakes could not be higher. What happens here in the coming days will shape the future for billions, determining not just the price of oil, but the stability of nations and the security of families everywhere. The current crisis did not erupt overnight. It is the result of years of mounting tension and mistrust between the United States and Iran, a relationship marked by suspicion, sanctions, and a series of escalating confrontations. Diplomatic efforts have repeatedly faltered, leaving both sides entrenched in their positions and the world watching anxiously. These tensions finally boiled over into open warfare, shattering any remaining hopes for a peaceful resolution. The region, already volatile, was plunged into chaos as military operations intensified and cities became battlegrounds. On February 28, 2026, the world watched as the US and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iranian targets. Officials cited growing fears over Iran's nuclear ambitions and its expanding influence across the Middle East as justification for the attacks. The strikes were swift and devastating, signaling a new and dangerous phase in the conflict. In retaliation, Iran moved quickly to close the vital Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which nearly 1/3 of the world's oil supply passes. Iranian forces targeted commercial vessels, crippling the global energy trade, and sending shockwaves through international markets. Ship traffic through the strait plummeted by 95%, and at least 24 ships were attacked or severely damaged in the chaos. the world's shipping industry was thrown into disarray, with rescue operations scrambling to save crews and contain environmental disasters. The human cost has been staggering. Thousands have lost their lives in Iran and Lebanon, as airstrikes and retaliatory attacks devastated neighborhoods and overwhelmed hospitals. Across the region, civilians have been caught in the crossfire, with countless more injured and displaced. Humanitarian organizations are struggling to provide aid amid the ongoing violence and instability. After weeks of relentless fighting, a fragile ceasefire was brokered, bringing a temporary halt to the violence. But this uneasy peace is set to expire soon, and the threat of renewed conflict looms large. The ceasefire was intended to create space for diplomacy, but negotiations have stalled. Deep divisions remain, and recent peace talks have ended in frustration and disappointment. Now, military forces on all sides remain on high alert. Borders bristle with soldiers, and warships patrol the tense waters of the strait, ready for any sign of escalation. Around the globe, people watch the news with growing anxiety. Financial markets are in turmoil, and world leaders are holding emergency meetings, desperate to prevent the conflict from spiraling further out of control. The fate of the Strait of Hormuz and the stability of the entire world now hangs in the balance, as the next chapter of this crisis is about to unfold. With the ceasefire expiring, U.S. and Iranian negotiators met in Islamabad for last-ditch peace talks. The U.S. demanded Iran abandon all nuclear weapons ambitions. Iran insisted on its right to a civilian program and security guarantees. Neither side budged. Deep mistrust and irreconcilable demands doomed the talks. The collapse ended hopes for a peaceful resolution and set the stage for dramatic escalation. Within hours, the world was plunged deeper into crisis. Hours after talks failed, President Trump announced a total U.S. Navy blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. will stop any vessel that pays Iran's toll, aiming to cut off Iran's oil exports and revenue. This is economic warfare, maximum pressure to force Iran back to the table. The blockade is also a direct military challenge, risking confrontation with any nation that tries to break it. The U.S. is now policing the world's most critical waterway. The move is bold, but it could ignite a much wider conflict. The global economy and security are now at stake. The world holds its breath as the blockade begins. The Hormuz crisis has already sent oil prices soaring. A U.S. blockade could double or triple them. 20 million barrels a day are now at risk. Nearly zero will get through. This could trigger a global recession, with higher gas and diesel prices everywhere. Transportation costs will spike, raising prices on everything from groceries to airline tickets. Inflation will squeeze families worldwide. Developing nations and energy importers will be hit hardest, facing shortages and blackouts. Even economic giants like China will scramble for alternatives at much higher prices. The blockade isn't just a geopolitical move, it's a shock to the global economy. Everyone, everywhere, will feel the impact. The world economy is entering uncharted territory. The blockade's effects are immediate and global. In Europe, countries like Slovenia have already rationed fuel, echoing the oil crises of the 1970s. China has imposed emergency energy-saving measures, closing schools and mandating remote work. Developing nations, especially in Africa, face rolling blackouts as fuel imports dry up. Hospitals, businesses, and homes are plunged into darkness. The crisis also threatens food security. 1/3 of the world's fertilizer moves through Hormuz. A prolonged closure means lower crop yields and higher food prices. The result: rising hardship, social unrest, and political instability worldwide. The blockade's reach extends far beyond the Gulf. It's a global crisis, touching every aspect of modern life. Can pipelines save the day? Not even close. While pipelines are often hailed as the backbone of energy security, their limitations become glaringly obvious in a crisis. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline and the UAE's Fujairah line can move just 6.5 million barrels daily, less than a third of Hormuz's normal flow. Even at full capacity, these pipelines are simply not designed to replace the sheer volume that passes through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That leaves a shortfall of over 13 million barrels per day. With no alternative route. The infrastructure just isn't there to pick up the slack, and building new pipelines would take years, not weeks. Major exporters like Kuwait, Qatar, and much of Iraq are completely dependent on the strait. Their oil fields are landlocked, with no direct pipeline access to open seas beyond Hormuz. Their oil is now trapped, devastating their economies and worsening the global shortage. Storage tanks fill up quickly, forcing producers to shut down wells and halt production. Pipelines are a partial patch, not a solution. They can help a little, but they're not nearly enough to keep the world supplied. Terminals can't handle the surge, and pipelines themselves are vulnerable targets. Sabotage, technical failures, or even routine maintenance can bring them to a halt. The world's energy system is built around Hormuz. There's no substitute. Every major oil importer, from Asia to Europe, relies on this narrow waterway. Its closure creates a crisis pipelines can't fix. The ripple effects are immediate. Prices spike, supply chains freeze, and economies everywhere feel the shock. The world is learning just how fragile its energy lifelines are. In the end, pipelines are only a small part of a much bigger, more vulnerable system. While the world watches Hormuz, war rages on the Israel-Lebanon border. The ceasefire doesn't apply here. Israel continues its campaign against Hezbollah. Daily clashes and airstrikes have killed thousands and displaced many more. Israel's ground offensive in southern Lebanon marks a dangerous escalation. The violence fuels regional tensions and humanitarian disaster. This front shows the conflict's complexity. Multiple actors, multiple crises. Even if Hormuz is resolved, the region's deeper conflicts remain dangerously active. The world is at a tipping point. Will Iran or China challenge the U.S. blockade? Will the crisis spiral into full-scale war? Diplomacy is the only real exit, but time is running out. Watch for military moves, oil market shocks, and any sign of renewed talks. The ceasefire expires soon. If nothing changes, war could explode across the region. The decisions made now will shape the world for years. The path to peace is narrow, but the stakes couldn't be higher.